Now we have our next presenter is no stranger to us. We have Cory here to present the history and prehistory of the North American bison.
Stop sharing that, first of all. And then share that. Okay. Are you seeing the? You're good. All right. Excellent. Oh, I suppose I should get this on, even though it will. Oh, good. I like to move around a lot. So. Okay. I do want to get this out of the way. Get you up there. All right. Hi again. So I have to begin with a couple caveats. First of all, I do call them buffalo. Sorry. Bison is the, no, it's fine. Bison is the scientific name. I don't call lions Panthera. I don't call buffalo bison. But just be aware, I'm talking about the North American buffalo, North American bison. Second caveat is that most of tonight is kind of correcting my book. As I'm sure a lot of you know, I published my book on the Ice Age in Western Canada, titled The Ice Age in Western Canada, back in 2020, about 3 weeks before COVID hit, which is a bad time to publish a book that you have to sell yourself. But since that time, and in that time and so on, of course, things have changed, especially DNA analysis. A lot of that has come up, and just my own depth of research and so on, discovering how much was actually wrong in that book. Sorry to everyone who bought it. But so tonight, I'm so slowly working on a second edition, and tonight is sort of correcting a lot of that Buffalo chapter in there. And the third caveat is that I am a professional educator, not a professional scientist. So I'm not presenting on my own work here. I'm synthesizing the research done by a lot of other people, including Michael Wilson, Beth Shapiro, Dwayne Frost, Bernice Azula, Christina Barron Ortiz, and so on. And it's really on the shoulders of giants sort of situation here. And I am very much cognizant that some of those people might even be listening in right now. So I present this all very humbly, and if there are any mistakes, those are mine, and do feel free to correct me on those. So with that all out of the way, here we go. A nice shot there. Oh, that's too dark. Not too light. How's that? Better. Shot of like my favorite place on the planet, Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. You can go down there and drive through the buffalo paddock. Please do not get out of your vehicle like I saw several people do this summer, because buffalo, well, I mean, they're big enough to toss a car anyways, let alone somebody outside of it. But a pretty darn small herd being kept at Waterton, about 12 to 20 individuals at any given time. Not even remotely like how it used to be when Europeans first arrived here. This is one of my favorite paintings by one of my favorite painters, Charlie Russell, When the Land Belonged to God, looking back at the olden days, before humans, ostensibly, although not quite as we'll talk about, definitely before Europeans arrived here, these vast herds of buffalo going across the Great Plains here. So you see Charlie Russell's incredible command of color in this painting. Here's another one by Carl Rungus. There's a painter active in this area, had a studio in Banff, again, showing just these incredible, massive herds of buffalo. And so tonight we're going to be talking about where the buffalo come from, what's their deal, how do they evolve here on the plains, how do the plains evolve to them, and how the modern buffalo and human cultures sort of grew and evolved together. And in this discussion about this icon of the prairies, we're going to start in the most logical place, downtown Los Angeles. California. Because downtown Los Angeles, California is one of the most incredible paleontological sites in the world. The La Brea tar pits. La Brea being Spanish for tar, so it's the tar pits. So weird to go to La Brea because here in Alberta we're used to, oh no, fossil sites you have to like drive way the heck out to the middle of nowhere, out in the Badlands, out in the mountains, whatever. No, here, downtown Los Angeles, you go park as you're walking down the sidewalk to get there. There's tar seeps coming up through the sidewalk. Pretty crazy. They have found an incredible array of specimens at this place. Over 3.5 million fossils have been pulled out of these ancient tar seeps from 9,000 to 40,000 years ago in the Los Angeles basin. And basically, you get the impression, especially from this model of a Columbian mammoth that they have up here, that it's like, oh, it's like these pits of tar that these animals are sinking down into like quicksand, very cinematic. Actually, no, these would have just been sort of like thin layers of tar that just would have been sufficient to get an animal trapped in there. And then they eventually die of exposure and hunger and thirst and get covered over by more tar over time. Just these thin layers is all it takes to trap a lot of different animals going down through. And really weird sight as well. 90% of the mammal fossils and 70% of the bird fossils at La Brea are carnivores as well. It actually works out for every herbivore, every large herbivore, there's one saber-tooth, one coyote, and 4 direwolves they find, which is, again, pretty crazy. That's pretty off-kilter for the actual percentages of the animals that would have been in the environment. You would have had way more herbivores than you have predators. So what's going on? Well, herbivore gets trapped, it's making a lot of noise, not having a good time. That draws in the predators. The predator's like, oh, easy lunch. All right, let's go. And then they get stuck themselves. And so it ends up being a predator trap at this site. Now, why are we talking about the La Brea tar pits? Well, there's lots of different ways to measure time, measure prehistory. I'm sure we're mostly familiar with the chronostratigraphic chart here of our different eras and eons and epochs and so forth. But there are other ways of measuring the past depending on what it is that you're measuring. And one of those is by land mammal ages or stages, where basically you're looking at different assemblies of different animals. And then some new animal comes in, some other animal goes extinct, you have a slightly different ecosystem, and you start measuring a new age from that time onward. And the Rancho La Brea has actually lent its name to the most recent of these North American land mammal ages. The Rancho La Brean, dated from 191,000 to about 11,000 years ago. And what defines the Rancho La Brean North American land mammal age is the arrival of buffalo into North America. Prior to 191,000 years ago, there just weren't buffalo in North America, which is super weird to think about. So where do they come from, though? If they're not from here, where do they come from? Well, over in Eurasia, you had this fellow right here, the steppe buffalo or steppe wisent. Steppe is a cold weather grassland ecosystem. In fact, during the our current ice age we're still in, up to about 11,000 years ago, the steppe grassland ecosystem was the largest single ecosystem in the world, spreading all across Eurasia and North America, maintained by the large animals that grazed upon it, like the steppe buffalo. About 6.5 feet tall, about 2,000 pounds. So pretty big, although not the biggest buffalo we're going to see tonight. These are the buffalo you see the cave paintings of right here. This is one of the paintings from Altamira, caves in Spain there, dating about 36,000 years ago. So we have some pretty good depictions of what these guys look like, hence why they're able to reconstruct it so well. So there they are, 191,000 years ago, spread across Eurasia, and then crossing Beringia, right here, the land connecting Siberia and Alaska. I heard it called the Bering Land Bridge. That makes it sound a lot smaller than it actually was. Beringia had the combined area of Alberta and British Columbia. So it was quite a large area. And it was across Beringia that the steppe buffalo crossed into Alaska and the Yukon about 191,000 years ago. And in Alaska, found one of the most incredible steppe bison buffalo finds ever, Blue Babe here, a mummified steppe buffalo. Discovered 1979 by gold miners in Alaska. Gold miners doing a lot of the discoveries of things in the Yukon and Alaska because they just basically take high pressure hot water hoses to the tundra and just spray it all out. And over there is their pile of buffalo skulls, and over there is their pile of mammoth ivory. And it's like, oh my God, can I have some of that? No, you cannot. And what is fascinating about this specimen, besides that it's just this beautiful mummified specimen of a steppe buffalo called Blue Babe because of mineralization during the or fungus, one of the two, during its mummification process, kind of makes it a bit blue. It has what killed it preserved as well in the form of gashes and punctures in its hindquarters and on its snout. And it's like, okay, it's left behind by the predators that killed it. These gashes, these punctures, and going, looking at these things, measuring them, seeing how big the holes are, comparing that to the predators that were known to be there at the time, and comparing that to modern predators. Well, we narrow that right down to American lions, about 25% larger than an African lion. And if you go to Africa today, well, you see them doing exactly what they did to Blue Babe back then, punctures and gashes around the snout and around the butt, right there, taking it down and basically eating as much of it as they could in the Ice Age autumn before the carcass froze. It couldn't get any more. The lions went on, and then come spring and the flooding and so on, it's covered over with sediment and preserved there in Alaska. Now, this time period, when we measure time by glacial periods and interglacials, the Illinoisan glacial period, and the steppe buffalo didn't really migrate further south because they were more or less blocked off. I say more or less because this is a pretty optimistic picture of what the Illinoisan looked like. It's very likely that the glaciers, one forming over British Columbia, the other over Hudson's Bay and spreading out, didn't actually meet during the Illinoisan. They didn't actually come together like they did in our most recent glacial period, but would have been like sort of alternating and shifting back and forth during the Illinoisan. But either way, blocking out the steppe buffalo from going further south until about 130,000 years ago, your interglacial, called the Sangamonian, when those glaciers were treated far enough that now buffalo could start to migrate further south down into the interior of North America, following that route there. And about 120,000 years ago, the steppe buffalo evolved into longhorn buffalo, those guys. Bison latifrons. Pretty amazing animal. A little bit shorter than 8.5 feet tall. So buffalo about yay big. 25 to 50% larger than a modern buffalo, with these huge horns. Would have been absolutely incredible to see. And living on the edges of forests. We're accustomed today in North America to seeing these broad swaths of different ecosystems, right? There's a band of grassland stretching from sea to sea. We have parkland, boreal forest, and tundra. Back during the Ice Age, that would have been far more broken up and far more mixed. So you'd have patches of grassland mixed with patches of parkland, patches of forest, and so on. And so these longhorn buffalo grazing at the edges of these forests, meaning that they probably were not living in large herds. Because you have, an 8.5 foot tall buffalo with these massive horns moving through the forest, that alone would be quite the feat, let alone having a whole bunch of them doing it. So they were probably living in much smaller groups, these longhorn buffalo. But 71,000 years ago, the glaciers moved back in. The Wisconsinian glacial period begins. And this time, the glaciers do meet. In fact, they meet right around here, right around Calgary, going basically from Edmonton all the way south to the border, along the Highway 2 is roughly where these glaciers met. And that isolates these populations. There's less gene flow. The steppe buffalo are isolated from the longhorn buffalo living in the interior of North America. And at that time, then, the longhorn buffalo, well, they take a bit of opportunity to do some more evolving. Because as the glaciers expand, well, that changes the ecosystems as well in North America. It gets cooler, grasslands expand. And so we get a new type of buffalo evolving from the longhorn buffalo. These be the ancient buffalo, or depending on who you talk to, bison antiquus or bison antiquus, whether you consider a species or a subspecies. These guys, about 7.5 feet tall, so a little bit smaller than the longhorn buffalo, but still considerably larger than a modern buffalo, 15 to 25% larger, adapted to grasslands, and these guys, most notable for this large hump that they have on here. Not a sail-backed buffalo, but basically these things were so huge that they needed to have huge muscles in their forelegs to move that bulk around. So you needed to have these huge shoulder muscles. It's got to be attached to something. It's attached to this huge hump of muscle and fat and so on, just to move the animal that huge around. And because they're living on grasslands now, well, these guys do move in herds, huge herds, but not like buffalo, like what we think of like modern buffalo, where there's millions of them, because in their environment, they are competing with other large animals that are around. For example, this ancient buffalo here crossing paths with a young male Columbian mammoth. Right there. But the giant camel, giant beavers were living in the forest. They'd be running into the longhorn buffalo more often. But two species of horses, the giant sloths that did live out in the grasslands, and so on. Lots of different animals out there, including the predators. So we already talked about the American lion here, again, about 25% larger than an African lion today. Probably did not have a mane. Manes are like exclusive to African lions. It was a genetic mutation that occurred in the population of lions in Africa, spread out throughout Africa, but manes were not found on lions from Europe, from India, and so we very reasonably assume they were not on lions here in North America either. There's also dire wolves as well, which are one of the animals that I had to write a second edition of my book for. Because based on the morphology of them, I thought, oh, okay, it's a canis, Canis dirus, its previous name. It's related to modern wolves. And it's actually about the same general size as a northwestern gray wolf today, just a lot heavier, a lot stockier, because it's hunting large Ice Age animals. But then DNA testing showed actually no, this is a native species of wolf from the Americas, not related to Canis. So that has changed some of what we thought we knew about wolf evolution and migration in North America here. Hence, I have to do a second edition. And then coyotes down here as well, which at this time would have been slightly larger animals, more of a pack animal, filling more of the niche that wolves do today. And that niche being partitioned so that these guys were doing a bit more of what wolves do today, these guys hunting more of the larger prey. There would have been wolves, the ancestors of Mexican gray wolves and the Great Plains gray wolves would have been North America at this time. But wherever coyotes and dire wolves are common, gray wolves are not. Because there's no niche for them, because the niche is being partitioned up between these two guys. Then there's this one. Everyone's favorite Ice Age animal, saber-toothed cat, which I brought my friend here to talk about. Now, these guys, actually just yesterday, my wife and I, we went down to the Trell Museum. Hadn't seen the new Precambrian exhibit yet. Pretty nice. But my favorite exhibit there is the two saber-tooths attacking the woolly mammoth. And I love it because it's so dramatic and so not what happened at all. Looks amazing, but it's got a few problems with it there. Now, the least of which being these teeth. These saber teeth, 6, 7 inches long, look terrifying, look incredible from the side. But you look at them from the front, and a little bit on the thin side there. So you have a saber-toothed cat, like the one at the Tyrrell, which is jumping off a cliff onto the back of a mammoth, bites into the mammoth with these thin teeth. That mammoth reacts, as one would. And what's going to happen to these teeth? They'll snap right off. Right? And if you are a saber-toothed cat without your saber teeth, what are you, really? Having an existential crisis, I guess. So, just the physics involved will give us a bit more of a profile of what these animals would have hunted and how they would have hunted. Saber-toothed cat, about the size of a lion, but about 100 pounds heavier or so. To use these teeth, it would have had to wrestle something down and hold it, immobilize it, so it could bite into it. In fact, probably an ambush predator. Lying in wait, something passes by, leaps out, wrestles it to the ground, might be by one or more of them. We're not entirely sure if they're pack animals, though we do find evidence of conflict between saber-tooths, including saber teeth-sized holes in the skulls of these guys. Wrestle this prey animal down to the ground, and then use these teeth to bite into the neck, severing the windpipe and jugular vein. So that tells us how these guys hunted. Well, what did these guys hunt? Well, for that, we can look at isotopes in their bones. Because different plants, and Georgie can help me out on this if I get it right. Okay. Capture carbon in different molecule chains. Now, cold weather is three molecule, right? Yeah, carbon C3 is cold weather plants. C4 is the warmer weather plants. Right. Now, by looking at these, we can figure out, like, okay, what were the predators eating? Because the prey animals, the herbivores, they eat those plants, they absorb those molecules into their tissues, gets eaten by the predators, that goes into their bones, and we can just do the measurements. What were these things eating? And, horses, C3 and C4. They're eating cold weather plants or eating warm weather plants. Saber-tooth, though, well, whatever it is eating, it's only eating it's only eating herbivores that are eating C3 plants. They're exclusively eating those. Okay, so what are the prey animal that does that? What are the ones that are only eating the C3 plants? Well, camels, llamas, and buffalo were the main available prey for this predator that was only eating the C3 plants, or only eating animals that were eating C3 plants. So you can imagine some young camel or some young buffalo walking by, maybe a young male who's left his herd, going to find greener pastures, as it were, or an older buffalo, maybe he's been kicked out of the herd, got his position taken over by some younger, more spry male buffalo, whatever, and walks by the wrong bush one day, out pops the saber-tooth, rustles that buffalo down, crunches into its neck, and there you go. And there's this thing. The largest bear that's ever lived, the giant short-faced bear. When it was on all fours, this bear was about 6 feet tall at the shoulder, so a bear that was as tall as me when it was on all fours. When it was standing up, 12 feet tall with a 6-foot reach. Oh my God. And what is this thing eating? Well, what does a 6-foot bear, 12 feet tall when it's standing up with a 6-foot reach, what does that eat? Anything it wants. Yes. And studies of short-faced bears here in the north part of North America found, came to the conclusion they were very likely kleptoparasites, meaning that they stole kills from other animals. They had very good sense of smell. They could smell prey from miles and miles away. And long limbs, really good at running long distances. Good marathon runner, but not good at short stops, sudden turns, and short bursts of speed. If it had attempted to like chase something down, like stop short, twist, and run, it would have broken its own legs. So, okay, can smell things from a far away. It can go running at those things from a long way away, but it can't chase things down, really. So what is it doing then? Well, some saber-tooths. They've caught that buffalo, they wrestled it to the ground, chomped into its neck, it's bled out, it's passed away, they're trying to nosh away on it, and then this guy smells it from far away. Comes loping over the horizon. Rears up, 12 feet tall, 6-foot reach. These saber-tooths are like, no, thank you. Here you go, sir. And steals the kill from them. Okay, but how do we know it wasn't just a scavenger then? Well, its teeth don't have the same breakage patterns that scavengers tend to have. So it wasn't accessing carcasses that had already been stripped clean and cracking bones and things like that, like a hyena would. No, this thing is eating fresh kills. And it's indiscriminate about what it eats as well, both C3 and C4. It's whatever it can find, it's eating. Put all that together and you get a kleptoparasite. Now, by contrast, studies of short-faced bears further south, on the bright tar pits, find actually they have a lot more cavities in their teeth as well. So they're eating more berries, things rich in carbohydrates, getting more cavities. So the ones in California, they're sitting on the beach, eating berries, having a good time, whatever. The ones up here in Canada, it's a little bit rougher lifestyle up here in Canada. But this is what our ancient buffalo are sharing their environment with, these huge predators and other huge herbivores as well. Then it gets complicated. And this is the part that I am most having to correct from my book. So, about 57,000, 29,000 years ago, there's an interruption in the Wisconsinian glacial period. The glaciers do a bit of a retreat, not all the way, but they do retreat a bit, and you start to get more flow, again, going north and south. It was previously north of the glaciers and south of the glaciers. You've got the steppe buffalo in Eurasia and Beringia. You've got longhorn buffalo and ancient buffalo here in the interior of North America. And then you get this other buffalo that evolves from steppe buffalo around this time, called the western buffalo, Bison occidentalis. Its holotype, where it was identified, first described, a specimen from Alaska, evolved from steppe buffalo, roughly the same size as a steppe buffalo as well. And based on for the most recent DNA work, and all this is from Beth Shapiro, not seemingly, apparently, related to any modern buffalo. So we're not even entirely sure if these guys actually migrated any further south than Alaska and the Yukon. Where it gets complicated is that we thought they did. Why do we think we did? We'll talk about that later. But based purely on just the bones, thought, oh yeah, this is just like Bison antiquus evolves into this slightly smaller other buffalo, Bison occidentalis. Well, it's a little complicated than that. 29,000 to 11,700 years ago, the glaciers close in again. The most recent glacial period that we've had, and here's what the situation is sort of looking like. You got steppe buffalo here across Eurasia, you got western buffalo now in Thuringia, Alaska, Yukon. South of the glaciers here, you've got the ancient buffalo, and you've got the longhorn buffalo aren't doing so well because glaciers have closed in and their forest habitat is disappearing. And it looks like about 20,000 years ago, longhorn buffalo go extinct, probably due mainly to the spread of grasslands during the last glacial maximum. About 20,000 years ago, the last time glaciers were at their largest and most frigid. Grasslands expand, and now we have these ancient buffalo here who can capitalize on that and basically just drive out the longhorn buffalo into extinction, which is unfortunate. They would have been amazing to see. Probably really difficult to mount in Waldo. So, yeah, last glacial maximum, there you go. You've got the western buffalo up there, ancient buffalo down here, and the longhorn buffalo are extinct. But, whoa, something else is happening as well. Shortly after this, as the glaciers begin to retreat, we get this extinction event going on here. 11,700 years ago, North America loses 70% of species over 100 pounds and everything over a metric ton. What happened there? Well, when I published my book, there was this like big whoop-de-doo of this new discovery underneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland. Because when you do some subsurface modeling, oh wow, neat, look, that oddly circular glacier is over a crater. Wow, cool. And then they dated that crater 12,000 years ago. Wow, that's like a smoking gun, finally. It wasn't just the dinosaurs that got wiped out by an asteroid, even the Ice Age animals did. Cool. Until a couple years ago, after I published my book, when they redated the material. It's like 50 million years old, this crater. So no, nothing to do with the Ice Age extinction. So another reason to do a second edition. What was going on? Well, there was climate changes going on. So, here is the last glacial maximum, right down about here, the coldest part of the Wisconsin. Boom, goes up, those all melt. Then about 12,000 years ago, you get this younger Dryas here, this cold snap, where temperatures drop. Again, you get this rapidly fluctuating climate here going on. In fact, that's really what an ice age is all about. We often think an ice age is just, oh, when it got so cold that glaciers formed. Not exactly. Earth's normal climate is actually quite warm and quite stable, but quite unseasonably warm. If you were around during like the Devonian, hopefully you're not around the tropics because you wouldn't last very long. You wouldn't be able to regulate your own temperature in Earth's normal greenhouse climate. For about 80% of Earth's history, it's been this warm, stable greenhouse climate. But then these different factors all line up. The shape of the Earth's orbit, the tilt of the Earth's orbit, the tilt of the Earth itself, its relationship to different stars and so on, energy output from the core of the Earth, energy output from the sun. These different cycles all line up, and Earth's climate gets more temperate, but also fluctuates more wildly. So it goes from warm and stable to boom, 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 like this. Now, overall, we consider that quite temperate because that's when we evolved. So to us, it's great. We love it. But this fluctuating, it gets cold enough that snow falls and stays and accumulates over the poles. And when it gets really cold, then it actually can spread, forms these glaciers, and they spread across continents. Keeps fluctuating, those glaciers advance and retreat over these times. But the name of the game here is that the climate is temperate enough. The winters are not quite as cold as they might be, not quite as extreme, but neither are the summers. Snow can accumulate each glacier. So anyways, Ice Age. You get this fluctuating climate going on. Now that's a little bit stressful for species, especially when you go from like really cold to really hot to really cold again in the course of like 5,000 years. Then there's this one invasive species that arrives from Asia, Homo sapiens, coming into the continent here about 22,000 years ago. The oldest archaeological site in North America is the human trackway site at, White Sands National Park in Mexico. It's actually the tracks of children playing in puddles, just to make it the cutest archaeological site as well. And those tracks are dated to about 21,000 years ago. Humans migrating across Thuringia and then traveling down the coast, the Pacific coast of North America, on land that today is covered by water, the continental shelf. But back when you had these massive glaciers, well, where's all that water coming from these glaciers? Oh, it's coming out of the water cycle. So sea levels are significantly lower, humans going down what's now continental shelf into the United States, and then when glaciers retreat, coming northward here into Canada. And okay, like 20,000 years ago, they're here. This extinction event doesn't happen until 11,000 years ago. It's quite a long time. So are humans related to that extinction or not? Well, it might not be so much just the specific presence of humans, but a critical mass of them, enough of them to impact the populations of these large herbivores and things. But humans are also not the only animal coming into North America at this time. We also have the ancestors of northwestern gray wolves, of grizzly bears, of moose, of elk, of lynx, and wolverines, all come about 12,000 years ago or so, also migrating from Eurasia across Thuringia. And are they competing directly with the species already here? Are they fighting over niches? Are they occupying niches left behind by the extinction of other things? Hard to say, and probably different in every single case as well. Like wolves, for example. Dire wolves, already mentioned, were about the size of a northwestern gray wolf, but a lot heavier, a lot stockier, designed to hunt these large icy animals. Well, now they're going extinct, and you have this other wolf coming in here, which is about your same size, but lighter, lither, faster. And you're both competing for smaller, lighter, more fleet-footed prey, deers and things like that are left behind. Well, who's going to win that competition? Well, we know who won the competition because northwestern gray wolves are still here. So all of these things combined are going to be affecting different species in different ways, and you get these trophic cascades. One animal goes extinct, and that causes another animal to go extinct, and on it goes down through these chains all through the ecosystem, resulting in this extinction event at the end of the Ice Age. Really neat study about this. This is based on the work of Christina Barron-Ortiz from the Royal Alberta Museum, of looking at the teeth of horses and buffalo to see what was happening with them before and after the last glacial maximum. Now, before last glacial maximum, horses were actually more dominant on our grasslands than the buffalo were, but were less dominant afterwards, all the way up to their extinction as well. There are no native species of wild horses in North America today. All of the quote-unquote wild horses in North America are the descendants of feral European domestic horses brought over here. Which is why it's so controversial. So what do we do with them? Because, like in Kananaskis, for example, some people are like, well, we should just leave them alone, right? They're wild animals, let them do their thing. Some say, well, they don't have any predators, really, to speak of, so we need to control their population, and right now we do that through licensed culls and captures, keep their population numbers down. Some think that they should just be gotten rid of entirely as an invasive species. Lots of controversy over that. A lot of people yelling at each other on Facebook about it. Personally, my solution to that problem is we just reintroduce the predators. So just prides of lions roaming through Kananaskis, I think would be great, but no one agrees with me on that. But it's elegant solution and so on. Anyways, so what's going on? Well, by looking at basically the growth rings on the teeth of bison and horses, and the wear patterns and so on, reconstructing what were these things eating, and when were they facing challenges and so on. What was their health looking like through their teeth? And what Bear and Ortiz found was that prior to the last glacial maximum, horses and buffalo were eating different things. But afterwards, they were in competition with each other for the same food. And that was a bit of a problem. It's called coevolutionary disequilibrium. Basically, when things are in equilibrium, you have like one animal comes in and it eats some of the plants or plants at a certain stage or whatever, and that clears things out for the next animal to come in and eat, the shoots of the plants growing between the other plants, that sort of thing. Hope that makes sense. Because they're eating different things at different growth stages and kind of helping each other along. But then you put this environmental pressure on, and now they're competing for the same resources. That seems to be what happened between horses and buffalo. And the buffalo won, and the horses did not exactly. That would suggest environmental process involved in their extinction, or at least for these for the horses here. And another thing that makes you go, that's interesting, is that the animals that went extinct at the end of the last glaciation there were all monogastric herbivores with one stomach. The survivors were all ruminants. There's multiple stomachs. So horses are monogastric, bison are ruminants, multiple stomachs. Again, so suggesting environmental causes, but again, hard to ignore the presence of humans either. Especially since we go here to the oldest archaeological site in Alberta, Wally's Beach. About 2.5 hours south of Calgary, 13,300 years ago. We have horses, camels, muskox, caribou, mammoths roaming around the St. Mary's River basin there. And we also find that I'm doing the research, Chris Jass and others, find the bones of camels and horses that have clearly been butchered by humans. As you can see here, like sections of rib with cobblestones placed on top, so on. Also found a Clovis spear tip at the site with blood residue still on it, and analysis of the blood, well, that's horse blood. So the ancestors of modern Blackfoot people were here 13,300 years ago hunting horses, right at the time they were facing all these environmental pressures as well. So likely combination of factors. But even though buffalo survived, doesn't mean they made it through completely unscathed as well. They also did face pressure and adapted to that pressure in ways that the horses did not. And this is where we get that complication coming in of the false Western buffalo. So, you read the buffalo chapter of my book. It's a very lovely, elegant story of you had the steppe buffalo coming in, they evolved into the longhorn buffalo, and then another wave of steppe buffalo come in, they evolve into the ancient buffalo, who then respond to environmental pressure by shrinking down, becoming the western buffalo, who then continue to evolve on into the modern plains and wood buffalo. Very lovely, very, very elegant, very linear story that is not at all true. So what did happen is, yes, there was that first wave of steppe buffalo. Again, they evolved into longhorn buffalo, and some of those longhorn buffalo evolved into ancient buffalo. You have that second wave of steppe buffalo, which evolved into western buffalo, the true western buffalo, but those eventually go extinct, and they don't contribute anything to the genetics of modern buffalo. The ancient buffalo, well, they keep going, and they respond to these environmental challenges, and they shrink down a bit and become something that looks exactly like a western buffalo. enough to confuse everybody until it analyzed their DNA. And then these guys, the Western quote-unquote buffalo, evolving into modern buffalo. Although even that is a little more complicated, because even now that people are aware to look at this, Michael Wilson pointed this out in one of his papers, that when you look at the photos of where Europeans have piled up all these buffalo skulls, and you can see skulls in there that have the features of ancient buffalo as well, like some of the shape of the horn cores and things like that. So it's yeah, it's still a little more complicated, a little more ebb and flow in how these things were evolving. So 11,000 years ago, you got Western buffalo up here. You have Western buffalo with quotes down here, and then things keep changing. 9,000 years ago, it gets warmer here on the plains, a period we call the Altithermal or Holocene climatic optimum. Rivers running dry, lakes shrinking, areas becoming desertified, grasslands expanding, increased wildfires, and so on. Basically, like what's happening today in our climate. And the Blackfoot people might even have a cultural memory of this event as well. In the story of Napi's gambling place, Napi is the sort of creator and trickster figure in Blackfoot tradition. Most of the stories of Napi are stories about how not to behave, what not to do. Now, Napi had a bit of a gambling problem, and he was gambling with the West Side man, who's the equivalent figure of the Tunaha people on the western side of the Continental Divide. In English, we call them the Kootenai people. And they were gambling, and Napi was not having a good time of it. He was losing every single match. He was losing everything. What was he losing? What was he gambling with? Well, the natural wealth of his territory. So the rivers were all being won by the West Side man, taken away. The animals were all being won by the West Side man. He was taking those away, the different plants, the different trees and everything. He's all taking all that stuff away until Napi has nothing left. It's this desolate expanse of nothing. And he makes one last offer to the West Side man. Hey, we'll have one last winner-take-all match. If I win, I get everything back. If you win, you get to keep everything. West Side man is like, well, I already got everything, so I don't know why I need to have this, but okay, fine. I'm game. Let's do this. And by hook or by crook, Napi wins this last gambling match, wins everything back, gets back all of his plants and rivers and animals and everything else. And that is also what defines the Continental Divide as the border between the Tunaha and the Blackfoot, that's Sitapi in Northern language. Kind of sounds a little familiar. If you look at it in context of the Altithermal, is this story a cultural memory of the Altithermal? Maybe. Pointing out, keeping in mind that these stories are not just there for the idle speculation of some white guy standing at the front of the classroom looking for cultural seeds of a cultural memory of a historical event, that these stories are important for these people's connection with the landscape, with the animal life, sharing values and ideals and ways of looking at the world. That's their main importance. It's just interesting possibility there. The Altithermal, we do know from archaeology and linguistics, was an important time in Plains history. About 7,000 years ago, you get this transition from what's called the early period to the middle period in archaeology, identified mainly through transition from using spear technology to throwing dart technology. So basically, spears are great for animals that you can get close to. They're a little bit further away, like there's not a lot of trees and bushes around, it's just grassland everywhere. You want something that you can hit it from farther away with. That's where a throwing spear comes in, or throwing dart comes in, hot level, that thing. We also see the development of the Proto-Algic language group in the Rocky Mountain foothills. Proto-Algic is the sort of ancestral language group from which the language of the Blackfoot comes from, as well as a whole bunch of languages from around the Great Lakes as well. seems to have developed in the Rocky Mountain foothills or the Columbia Plateau around 7,000 years ago. And then by the end of the Altithermal, 5,600 years ago, Hess-Smashton buffalo jump was used for the first time as a buffalo jump. So buffalo became so numerous that the most efficient way to hunt them became chasing them all off a cliff. So you kind of get this sense here, okay, the Altithermal, the grasslands are expanding. Buffalo react to that, increase in number, go roaming around. Blackfoot culture develops in response to this change in climate, to this change in the habits and the evolution of buffalo, and these basically Blackfoot culture and buffalo sort of co-evolving together during this event. And about 5,000 years ago is when the western buffalo, the false western buffalo, goes extinct, and roughly about when ancient buffalo more or less do again. It depends, like if for ancient buffalo, western buffalo with quotes are just like a chronotype of ancient buffalo. Then yeah, whatever. But about 5,000 years ago, you get the plains buffalo and wood buffalo evolving. There are two modern species of buffalo. Around this time is also when steppe buffalo went extinct in Alaska and Yukon. But the true western buffalo, the one that descended from the steppe buffalo directly, probably survived up to like 1,700 years ago before going extinct. Now this raises another question though, like why did the buffalo shrink again? Well, partly, okay, in response to a harsher climate during the Altithermal, but also, humans, we do not hunt like other predators do. Other predators go after, smaller prey, weaker prey, older prey, and so on. We don't tend to do that. We tend to do the opposite of that. We go after the big things in the prime of their life. So did that put an evolutionary pressure on buffalo to shrink in size, because we're killing off the biggest ones, to grow faster, and to run away? Because anyone that stood and fought, we would kill. So did we actually, humans, affect the evolution and actually cause the evolution of modern buffalo? Maybe. I mean, the most recent stage of buffalo history, the late Holocene population bottleneck, which is the polite way of saying we almost killed them all off. Here's a quote by Peter Erasmus, Métis guide for the Palliser expedition. We traveled through herds of buffalo nearly all the way. Deep ruts scored in the prairie grass where the buffalo had traveled for centuries in their migrations back and forth across the plains. Our journey was frequently interrupted by the need to wait for the huge herds of buffalo that blocked our passage. These vast herds were the greatest I'd ever witnessed. I only then realized that we had been in the extreme northern edges of the great herds that grazed along our borders and away south into American territory. But, he would go on to say, it was then beyond my imagination to believe that the next 15 years would see the last period of the buffalo's existence in our country. Only 15 years from the Palliser expedition to the turn of the century. By the 1800s, estimated there were approximately 30 million buffalo in North America. By 1900, they were less than 600. Just over the course of a century. Even less than that, by the time we're actually really started hunting them down. The largest free-range herd of buffalo in North America was in Yellowstone, a herd of less than 30. There were none in Canada. Why? Of course, well, hunting them for multiple reasons. You had the buffalo hunters, guys like Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp and Buffalo Bill Cody hunting these animals. At the peak in the 1880s, while the railway was being constructed through the United States and through Canada, 1860s to 1880s, you had upwards of 5,000 buffalo hunters, each one pulling in about 250 buffalo a day. So that's going to have an effect. You had the trade in the buffalo furs as well, the whiskey traders here in southern Alberta, Fort Lupa. They were coming for the buffalo furs. There was a deliberate plan of extermination of the buffalo because they were relied on by Indigenous people, and by taking away that source of resources, of food and clothing and everything. Basically, I've heard indigenous people on more than one occasion describe the buffalo as their Walmart. Forces indigenous people to become reliant on making treaties with the government to meet their needs. And then just recreation. Railways would advertise you could hunt buffalo, in quotes, from the comfort of the railway. Just passes by to stick your gun out the window and start shooting, just senselessly slaughtering these animals as the trains roll by. And that's what you get, is the near extinction of an animal that had 30 million a century prior. So, once we realized that, hey, the buffalo were disappearing, maybe we should do something about that. 1907, herd of buffalo became available to the government of Canada, so they purchased it and brought them to what's now Elk Island National Park. From there, they were moved over to Buffalo National Park near Wainwright, except for about 45 that had eluded capture at Elk Island, thank goodness. Buffalo National Park was dissolved in 1947 after being almost a complete disaster. They didn't really have enough food for them. They crossbred with cattle. They were riddled with disease, overpopulated with the carrying capacity of the park. So they closed the park and moved them all up to Wood Buffalo National Park. Other set of problems there. But at Elk Island, however, they maintained herds of both plains buffalo and wood buffalo, both subspecies, both genetically pure, distinct from each other, and from cattle, and disease-free as well. And because the park is only so big, they do have to fission off individuals from the population so they can keep a healthy population in the park. And those extra animals, well, those go all over the place to different conservation projects. Prince Albert Grasslands, Banff National Park, Waterton Lakes National Park, Riding Mountain National Park, as well as Yukon, Northwest Territories, BC, down to USA, over even Russia and Europe as well, to replace the now extinct steppe buffalo from Europe that was sent. Most recently is Banff, restoring buffalo to Banff, but also the Buffalo Treaty signed by a number of different indigenous groups in Western North America to work with Elk Island and Yellowstone as well to bring buffalo back to reserves across North America, and not only ecological preservation, but also cultural repatriation, building that relationship with the buffalo, which is really cool. So at present, there are about 500,000 buffalo in North America today, most of them in private herds. There's about 1,000 that are free-ranging throughout Canada today. And the easiest place to see them is a Waterton Lakes National Park. Well, actually, no, technically the easiest is the zoo, but Waterton Lakes National Park, the paddock down there, Elk Island National Park as well. If you want to see the free-ranging ones, then either you have to go traipsing into the backcountry in Banff or Prince Albert National Park. Those would be your next closest bets, or just go driving down to Yellowstone and checking them out. And if you're really lucky, like I was, you'll get caught in a buffalo jam. You become part of the herd. You just prefer to roam along and praying that they don't decide to toss your car over. So, there you go. There you have it. The history and prehistory of the North American buffalo. Again, still working on second edition. Yeah. Well, now that I've said I'm working on it, I better actually do that. So we'll see. I have to still have a lot of reading ahead of me to fix it up. I've got at least another good 100 papers to add to what I've already researched when I wrote the first edition. Have to decide if I want to expand it to Manitoba or to the Pacific Northwest as well. That may involve some traveling. Oh no, oh darn. And I'd like to get a real publisher for it as well. So it's not just like me self-publishing through Amazon to do it. So I actually have like colored photos and stuff in there as well. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But it'll probably be a couple of years off yet. So, any other questions?
So these bison that Francis was finding in White Horse, they would be the true Western.
Yeah, steppe or the true Western. Yeah.
And not the false Western.
Yeah, and the true Western and false Western is my terminology.
Yeah.
It's not actually in their papers. I just didn't know what to call them. So there we go. But yeah, that's what they're finding up there, is those bison occidentalis or bison friscus. Yeah.
Thanks for the nice presentation, Cory. All of those maps that you have, now what is the current status?
Oh,
And did it get affected by the opening?
I can't answer the Bering Strait question, but the steppe buffalo, yeah, went extinct like thousands and thousands of years ago. The Eurasian buffalo, or was sent, I believe is extinct. I don't know exact. I'm pretty sure. It's like I've been looking mostly North America, so Europe. I don't know. So I'm over there, but
Yeah,
yeah.
because I was just wondering if descendants of those animals were.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't believe so, but don't quote me on that. Yeah.
My question is the process of this averaging from Ukraine. Back in Ukraine, we have I found bison bananas.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, and as far as I know, they even can eat other bisons, but I what do you know about how this is how long ago they went separate?
Yeah. Well, obviously nothing, because I didn't even know they were still around. So, yeah, I don't know.
Because they look exactly the same.
Yeah.
I saw those. We call them super.
Yeah.
So I saw those 15 years ago, 20.
Yeah.
And they look exactly like.
Yeah. I don't know specifically. I do know, like, generally that the whole, like, the way we used to like categorize animals as like, oh yeah, well, things are separate species because they can't interbreed and have fertile offspring. That's not true. So it's like that shift to like cladistics, where it's like, yeah, you can have these different species interbreeding and having fertile offspring and so on. Like grizzly bears and polar bears can do it. The two different species of buffalo can do it. So yeah. All I can say is just that, what we thought we knew about biology is more complicated than what we thought. Oh, I see a question on the chat as well. No, that's just Eric saying questions.
Hey, I've got a question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Cory, great presentation. And have you any idea what was happening in the Eurasia area? Like, did it also have this kind of evolutionary process that you've described? Like, for example, do you know if they also had a longhorn buffalo like you described on the North American side?
I think we've already established that I don't know anything about Eurasia. So I would be hesitant to try and make any more of a fool of myself by trying to answer that.
Yeah, no, okay, fair enough. Yeah, okay, thanks then.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, well, we will conclude there. Thank you so much, Cory, for filling in and giving this presentation. It's very, very interesting. I did not know that much about buffaloes, so And next month, we have a couple of presenters. So we have Tego Koning and Dale Lakey, and they are going to present Great Sandhills, Southwest Saskatchewan, among the largest sand dunes in Canada. And then we also have an online presenter, Sally Hurst, who she is going to do a presentation from Australia and join us there. And hers is a slight change in title. It's called Human Fossil Interactions in Ancient and Modern Contexts. And she'll be comparing Australia and Alberta environments. So we look forward to the next meeting and thank everyone for coming out tonight and joining us online.